My name is David Sodergren. I'm a Scottish horror author. I've written books, as you can see, but oh my God, it's mirrored. You can see books like Forgotten Island, Maggie's Grave, and The Har. And my latest one, And By God's Hand You Shall Die. So it's just a mixture of all types of different sort of horror genres and styles. I like to try my hand at all of them. And this pug that just walked out of his shop. Come on, buddy. This is Boris. He's thanks, buddy. He's my little mascot that you see on the side of all my books as my company logo. That's it.
Brilliant. So, first of all, what made you decide that you wanted to get into writing?
Yeah, I don't think anything really made me decide that it's always been on the cards. I think I started writing. I started reading horror very, very young, and I started writing it extremely young as well. So probably about the earliest surviving story that I have is from when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
About my school being invaded by aliens and me killing them all. So that you know, I used to write sort of sequels to horror films that I'd enjoyed. So I had I think I had a Child's Play 4. I think I wrote Child's Play 4 before there was Child's Play 4, Bride of Chucky. And yeah, I just always loved writing, and then stopped for decades, and then picked it back up again 5 years ago.
Well, there we go. What made you decide to pick it back up again?
I'd gotten right back into reading again. I hadn't read as much for a long time, and then I got right back into reading and being on like social media stuff at the time when social media was a bit more fresh and exciting than it is nowadays. I had been on Instagram a lot and seeing all the classic horror novels and things being on there, and seeing a lot of people that I knew and spoke to who also self-published and who occasionally traditionally published as well. It just made me want to have another crack at it, and I just sort of had to find the time and the effort to actually do that, and it worked out quite well.
Good. And what made you decide that you wanted to write horror? Was it always just horror that you went to read? And
always, yeah. I've been absolutely obsessed with horror for ever, for as long as I can possibly remember, from being a very, very small child. I do like other things as well, but generally, everything I write is going to have some sort of element of horror in it. I just love it.
I get that. I'm exactly the same. My gran and granda were showing me like far too horrific films for me at a young age, and that was me. My brain was just like, oh, I love this.
Fantastic. Do you remember any sort of ones? What ones?
Oh, like Eraserhead and like really like bizarre Maniac, like stuff that I could not be seeing. Like I was, oh, this is brilliant.
I was the opposite way. So my parents weren't into it, but then I started showing my mum all the horror films, and now she absolutely loves them as well. And she'll phone me up and say, "Oh, David, we just watched an awful scary one called Snow Beast." I'm like, right.
That's good.
Yeah, I got her into it, so that was nice.
Excellent. And so you say that obviously you go back into reading and stuff, and you read a lot of horror. So is there any inspiration authors for you that you sort of take into your writing?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, the obvious one, I'm sure absolutely every single person says, is Stephen King. So we'll just gloss over that, because obviously everyone's read Stephen King. Most people love Stephen King. However, there's a few more that are bigger influences on me, and I would say they're two English authors. Boris, stop squeaking. Sorry, that's my dog. Two English authors that I absolutely adore, Sean Hudson and James Herbert. So James Herbert obviously was a little bit more mainstream, kind of, but Sean Hudson never really got mainstream. It was always a bit more down and dirty, and it was very, very British, very rainy, miserable, dark, depressing sort of stuff, and that definitely fed into. You can definitely read early Sean Hudson and see an influence on some of my books, particularly "And by God's Hand You Shall Die." That's definitely got some strong Sean Hudson in it. "Satan's Burnouts Must Die" as well. That's very Sean Hudson.
I've never actually read for him, so maybe need to pick him up. I have read some James Herbert though.
Oh, do yeah. I would recommend starting with one called Spawn, which is
Spawn.
hideously dark and gruesome and oh, a horrible book, but amazing as well. I picked it up in a charity shop probably in about 1990 or something like that, and in Peebles, and read it on the drive home. Read most of it on the drive home. Absolutely fantastic book. Definitely, that book in particular made a big impression on me. And then I read everything else. You know, when you were younger and you had endless time to read and you could just buy a book and you would just sit and read it that afternoon, whereas now it takes me a good month to get through 300 pages. Mr. Please.
And so then tell me a wee bit about your writing process then. Like, do you think of a certain character or a certain situation and it sticks with you, or how does that work?
It's it varies. It varies. I tend to come up with an idea, sort of a vague idea for what kind of story I want to write, or a slight idea, and I'll sort of try and outline it, and I'll come up with a sort of outline that kind of almost works. It's like, you know, kind of. Then I'll start writing that. I usually get about halfway into that, and by that point, I realize what the story is, who the characters are, what's actually happening, and then I'll just sort of start from this beginning again and write the whole thing. That seems to work for me. It's a bit laborious, possibly, to write half a novel and then figure out what it is and scrap it and start again. But I write really quickly, so
Oh, that's good. That's handy.
yeah, there's usually enough stuff in that first draft that I'm like, well, I can keep that. I can, you know. But yeah, it can be. Sometimes I'll just think, oh, quite fancy writing in a particular genre. So I mean, Night Shoot, for example. Oh, got it. Yep. That was just I wanted to write a slasher, and so I tried to think of a slasher, and that's how it came about.
Excellent, excellent. Is there any like subgenre horror where you're like, I definitely would not go there, like that is not for me?
There is probably one, but more for reasons because it's one I would say it's probably the only horror subgenre that I'm not particularly interested in. Try to read my book. Yes, yes. I am not particularly fond of the sort of demonic possession thing. I find that pretty boring in almost every case. Not every case. Sometimes, you know, there's something good, but I find people possessed by demons and priests waving crucifixes at them and chanting, I find so incredibly dull that I just can't see myself ever getting writing one like that unless I come up with some great idea that I'm like, oh, that's completely different. But I'm not going to force it because
No, that's fair. That's absolutely fair.
Yeah.
So your monsters are definitely a standout for me in your book. I think that you just have such an amazing way of just making them so captivating. Like they're so vivid, you can totally imagine them, but like also you have like this emotional connection to them almost sometimes. Like you give them like proper feelings and really good backstories. And so how do you come up with your monsters?
It's similar in a way actually to the way I write in general, which is so for example, Night Shoot, when I started writing that, and mild spoilers, very mild spoilers if you've not read it, but when I was started writing that, I didn't actually know who the killer was going to be. And as it developed, I figured out the killer, and then unexpectedly more killers showed up. And it was around that point again when I was like, oh, right, I totally get this. I see. And certainly with Sebastian, you begin to, his character made. Well, I didn't just want it to be a faceless Jason Voorhees type killer. I wanted, like you say, it's emotional connection with the characters is the goal at the end of the day. Not just with your heroes, with your villains, and with your monsters as well. I guess the best example, though, the monster that everyone seems to really enjoy is Maggie Wall from
My favorite.
who started off as pretty much just a monster, but then with the backstory and things, I began to really like Maggie, and you can see Maggie's point of view. She's doing what she thinks is right. She's been wronged, so when you've got it's quite interesting to have your protagonist up against a villain that's actually the reader could potentially be sympathetic to. It's who you're going to root for.
Yeah, definitely. And have you got a favorite character that you've ever written?
A favorite, other than all the pugs that are in Grub from Forgotten Island being my favorite, I suppose as an actual non-pug character, I actually really like Charles Anderson from my section of the Navajo Nightmares story I co-wrote with Steve Stred. I wrote the first half, he wrote the second half, two sort of independent novellas. It's my only lead character I've ever done that is a man, but it was quite fun because I generally prefer writing women, but writing Charles, I just got to indulge my sort of silly macho Clint Eastwood fantasies, and just have this grizzled tough guy, but also try to give him some depth and emotion as well. I really enjoyed writing him. Yeah, I'd say Charles.
Excellent. I just want to also say, I think that you write women amazingly in books. I can't tell you how many books by a male author I've picked up and just been like, oh, they've never met a woman in their life, because they're just so one-dimensional and terrible. And me and loads of other reviewers talk about it all the time on BookTube, and you're one of the very, very few male authors who nails it every single time for me. It's excellent.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's my. I love to hear. I love to hear that because it's certainly one of the inspirations for me writing was a sort of. It was to avoid certain tropes that crop up so often in the kind of horror books I read, the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s stuff, even into the 90s and beyond, where generally the hero of the book was this sort of lantern-jawed, pipe-smoking professor in his 40s and stuff, and he maybe had a bimbo with him. We've all seen the meme, for the bimbo who bounces boobily down the stairs and things like that. I wanted to get away from that. It's so boring, and these pipe smoking professors are so uninteresting as leads with their logic and their reason and their sensible stoic nature. I'm like, just fuck off. So yeah, it's much more interesting to write a wider palette of characters. So I'm very pleased to hear that you think that. That's excellent.
What do you feel has been the best or worst thing about going down the indie publishing route? How have you found that personally for your books?
I mean, for me, it's been a tremendous success. Like not just in terms of sales and things, but I've really enjoyed the whole process. I am someone who likes a lot of control over what I'm doing. I am very happy to do all sort of aspects of it. I know there's some people who just enjoy writing, and they just like to write, and they don't care about. Yeah, they don't want to get involved in things like the marketing and the cover art and all that sort of stuff. But I enjoy every part of it. So I love having that control that you don't necessarily get, or almost certainly don't get, if you're publishing traditionally. Now, I have no experience of publishing traditionally because I've never tried, because I don't think anyone would be particularly interested in publishing the sort of books I write. So as long as you're happy to have every single thing fall on you, then I think it's a tremendous way to go. You get full control, you get tremendous profits. If you get like much more profit per sale of book and things. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, especially things like the marketing, which is the stuff that I absolutely hate. I'm very lucky that I have an extremely handsome pug who I can just put a photo of the book next to him and put down TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and things, and that thankfully is enough to sell the books for me. It's tough because nobody wants to be that person who's just spamming everyone all the time. You see these people, on Facebook posts on like Books of Horror or something, and they're just spamming with their boring looking book, and just like that's not going to work. Nobody's going to buy it like that. It's got to be more organic. But yeah, I'm a big fan of the indies. Indie self-publishing and things like that. I would recommend anyone try it if they're willing to really make a go of it. You can't just write a book, put it out there, and expect to sell even more than 5 copies. It's not going to happen. Unless you got 6 friends, then you might sell 6. But it's a hell of a lot of work, but really rewarding.
Brilliant. And what is your favorite bit of writing a book?
That's tough because I like it all. The worst part, you didn't ask that, but the worst part is in every single book, you've maybe coming to a close on your first draft, but there's what you've got to get from like the end of the middle of the book to the climax of the book. And it's always that exact bit where you've got to juggle a bunch of things and then get all the pieces into place and all the players in the right positions and stuff. And that is always the worst part. There's always something in the way where you're like, oh my God, I've got to put in this extra chapter to get, I hate that part. Everything else I love. I think editing it is actually probably my favorite because that's when it starts to feel like a real book. Because you can read through your first, second, third draft or something and you're like, yeah, it's fine, it reads. But it's not good enough, and it's only when you get to the editing that actually it really starts to work. That's when you think, okay, this isn't just total garbage. This actually might be publishable. So I love the editing stage. I know some people hate that.
I know most people I've spoke to hate that. That's like their worst bit. Most other authors I've spoke to, that's like their worst bit. They're like, didn't want to edit.
It's great. I studied, I've got a degree in editing film, so I am very into just sitting on my own for hours and hours and days and weeks and months poring over. I used to pore over the difference between 24 frames in a second, and now I'm just moving commas around and working on the sentence structure and the rhythm of the language and things, and I just love that. Yeah, my problem is I could edit for ever. At some point my wife says that I have to actually put the book out, so I have to stop eventually. But yeah.
And do you have a current work in progress? I know we have just put a book out, which I've just started. I'm only like 3 chapters in, but
I have 4, I think, currently. There's one that's almost finished, but my problem is I think too much about these things sometimes. I like to have, if I have a book set in America, like And by God's Hand You Shall Die, available on Amazon. If I have an American book, I like to put out a Scottish book after that, because I love writing Scottish stuff, but so many of the things I like to write are inevitably going to have to be set in America because they're set in the desert or something like that. So that book I've just put aside because I want to put out a Scottish one next. So I've got a couple of options for that, which are again very much in a horror subgenre that I've not written in. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm trying to do a fun book as well after, because And by God's Hand is pretty heavy. It's bleak, miserable, dark, unrelentingly horrible and violent and nasty. So I'd like to do something a little bit more fun. But then I always think that, and then it turns out bleak, miserable, horrible, and nasty. So Night Shoot was supposed to be a really light-hearted slasher homage, and then
took a turn.
Yeah, yeah. I can't help it. So we'll see what happens with this this new one that I'm working on. But I tend to have lots of things on the go at the same time. So if I ever get stuck on something, I can just jump onto the other thing for a while.
Well, that's really good. Do you find like it easier to have a few on the go at one time then, or?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I don't really have a problem juggling them sort of in my head. I don't get too confused with having different, like going from characters and one thing and repeating stuff. No, I definitely like having multiple things on the go. I mean, I've got my spreadsheet that has about God, the last count had about 30 different stories sort of planned out on it. Some of them fully outlined, some of them just a title. You know, it's as long as you keep yourself slightly organized, it's fine.
Spreadsheets definitely help. Do you
Work.
sometimes just get like an idea that pops into your head then, and you're like, better add that to the spreadsheet before I lose it?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. I've got, I think on my phone as well, I've got a notes thing which has dozens and dozens of one-line ideas, like just titles and stuff. I'm like, oh, that's great. I need to use that at some point. Yeah, you got to keep organized. That's the thing, and also throw nothing away. So I, if you cut out, like Forgotten Island, for example, I cut out about 70 pages or something from before publishing it. And that entire section that I cut out, I kept, and it became a completely different novel. It became The Perfect Victim. So that was basically a deleted subplot from Forgotten Island. It was completely and totally rewritten for Perfect Victim, obviously, but let's just say don't throw anything away because you might be cutting out an entire novel.
No, that's actually really good advice for any writers who are watching. We are actually reading The Perfect Victim this month as my book club's pick. So
Oh, right.
very excited. If anybody wants to join us, let me know and I can link the book club.
Oh, I hope you enjoy it. That's it's one of that and Satan's Burnouts Must Die are my two books that just have sunk without a trace. Like
I really loved Satan's Burnouts Must Die. I thought it was brilliant.
me too. I think it's my favorite of the ones I've written, and it's like I've got two sequels like fully outlined, but until I actually sell some copies of it, I'm not going to bother writing them.
Well, people need to buy that because I want sequels, so we'll make it happen. We'll move on to some subscriber questions then. So Danny asked, where does your inspiration for your stories come from?
Hello, Danny. Everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Even like when I was writing The Har, I'd written a lot of the book, and I was a little bit stuck. It just wasn't quite working for me at the time. And I went to, as my friend it was an evening of female artists, and they had someone doing a poem, and in the poem she mentioned the Har, like the Scottish Har, as you well know, which for anyone watching who's not from Scotland, it's a sort of fine sea mist that comes in from the north generally. And it's just that mention of the Har. I was like, oh, hang on, that completely unlocked the Har for me. And at that point, I changed the book so that the Har was bringing something in and taking something away, and it made it more sort of fairy tale-ish. And so that's the sort of thing where it's a random chance word that you hear, or just something you see on the TV, or something that happens in real life. Not often doesn't give me like a story or an idea, but it very often helps to like unlock an idea that you're been struggling with. My inspiration generally, if I'm like trying to sort of come up with a story idea, would just be from watching horror films. Like Forgotten Island started off as inspired by watching Italian cannibal films like Cannibal Holocaust, Cannibal Ferox, and things like that. Dead Girl Blues was very much in the style of the 70s Giallo films. I'd say I'm mostly influenced and inspired by films. That would be, yeah.
Excellent. Big film geek.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And then Simon asks, how does music influence your writing?
Oh, music's an enormous influence, actually. Oh yeah, you know what? That's actually that's the answer to the previous question. Yeah, I hadn't even thought. Yeah, that's how when I sort of come up with an idea or think of something, I will generally the first thing I want to do is try and figure out a sort of playlist for that idea, and then that story once it gets going, where it's something that sort of matches the tone and style that I'm going for, and that can be anything from like film soundtracks or classical to like Satan's Burnouts was written to a lot of sort of 90s surf punk rock sort of instrumental things. Yes, I will listen to that playlist over and over again. I will listen to the music. I will see the images. I'll see it as if it's a film playing out in my head. The music is an absolutely enormous influence and inspiration. And you'll see it, I think, throughout my books, because there's very, very often musical references to bands and artists. I like to put in what's playing on the radio at the time, and the off chance that maybe someone reading the book at that point will put that song on Spotify and play it along, and because that's generally how I wrote it, was with that song playing. So I always put like the artists and albums and stuff that I listen to at the back of the book, because yeah, it's just great. Oh, I love music. It's brilliant.
Right, gun to your head, favourite band?
The Beach Boys.
Beach Boys.
Classic.
Yeah. And then Simon also asks, has Boris ever requested a name change, given recent political leaders?
Yeah. No, we're basically, when we introduce him to new people, it's generally along the lines of, this is Boris. No, he's not named after that one. It's just sort of say he's named after Boris Karloff. It's not in particular. I just thought Boris was a fun name for a pug. And at that time, Boris Johnson hadn't really been in the news much. He was that guy who was mayor of London for a while, whatever. And then shortly after we got Boris, the whole Brexit thing sort of happened, and and then it spiraled into madness. So unfortunately, yeah, we stick with Boris, but sometimes, you just call him Morris, Horace, Doris. It all works. All works.
That's fair.
Poor guy.
Oh, I know.
It doesn't help that he's the same colour of hair. Sorry?
I was just saying he's definitely got better hair.
Oh my God, yeah. Good God. I know which one I'd trust more anyway.
Oh, me as well. Definitely. So something that I thought might be interesting to talk with you about is something that has been quite prevalent in the horror reviewing community at the minute, and that is whether horror needs to be allowed to be offensive in order for it to be good horror, or whether it shouldn't be offensive to any particular groups of people, like most other literature, because it's quite a hot button discussion at the minute.
Well, I mean, without knowing the full sort of content, I don't know, it's like any certain books and stuff kick this off, and
no like a particular book, but there certainly have been some books. So like Graham Masterton wrote a book, The Silent People or something like that, The Shadow People, not too long ago, and it was pretty transphobic, and so loads of people were like, well, like it's not really appropriate. And then there's just been some horror authors as well who have been having a conversation basically saying that you can't write horror constricted. Like if you can't say this, you can't say that, then it's not going to be like a true horror. And there's a wee bit of a discussion around that.
I mean, I think the problem there is the idea of a sort of true horror. What's true horror?
Yeah.
No, it sounds like a lot of nonsense. It's hard with like things that are offensive, because there are certain things that are like, obviously some people are professionally offended by stuff, it seems, and whereas there's things that, if you go to something that's actually transphobic or racist or sexist or something, I mean, so is that what they're saying is real horror? Is like,
it's basically that horror should be allowed to push any boundary it wants to push, regardless of who that would offend. which I don't necessarily agree with, but
No, I don't know why you'd want to. I just offense, like you can write to cause offense, and it's
Mhm.
literally the easiest thing in the entire world. A small child could do it. There's no skill and talent in just being offensive, because offensive it's so easy. You just need to be um a jerk and be racist, sexist, transphobic, whatever. That's fine. You can be offensive in a very clever and interesting way, certainly, and there's a lot of extreme horror authors doing things like that at the moment. But they're more offending sort of square sensibilities rather than just aiming for marginalized groups. That doesn't seem to be particularly an avenue worth pursuing. I don't know why you would want to sort of punch down like that on marginalized groups. Um, it's an interesting one because I've had both sides at me at one point. I remember what book was it? I think it was Night Shoot. Back when I used to read my reviews, I remember getting 2 1-star reviews of that in a row right next to each other. And the first one said that it was disgusting, misogynist, sick trash, and just, this author should be locked up. And then the other one was like, this is this social justice warrior, and I'm like, well, which is it, man? Am I a rampant offensive misogynist, or am I a SJW? Like, you can't win. You can't win. Personally, I've no real interest in being offensive. I can be cruel and nasty, and I can write in very poor taste, and that's all fun. I like horror that's fun. I don't see why you would want the people arguing for being offensive against minorities. I don't know why they're arguing that, because I don't know why you would want to. It just seems like a pretty dull avenue to tread, to be honest.
totally agree. I think like if you maybe offend somebody with like the level of gore or sex or whatever in your book, like that's a bit different. And like
Yeah.
maybe that book's just no for you. I love really gruesome body horror. Totally appreciate that that is not for everybody. Like, and that's fine. You're not going to offend me with that, whereas other people might get a wee bit offended at that just because it's
That's it, yeah.
genre. But I think if you're going to go against like a specific group of people, it's just in poor taste, and I don't feel that there is a need for that. I think horror for me, whether it's horror film or horror novels, has always been like so fucking political and punk. Like
Yeah.
it shouldn't be lowering itself to try to belittle anybody. Like everybody's been welcome.
That's it. That's the thing with the horror should be. It's like the heavy metal community in a way. It should
Mhm.
be like a really welcoming, all inclusive thing, because we're all freaks and weirdos in this group.
Yeah.
Everyone reading and writing horror and stuff, into horror, watching it, whatever. We're all in a way some sort of outcast, slightly different from the norms. That should be celebrated. I mean, my books, I would say, are woke, politically correct, despite the fact they have like sadistic violence and horrible, horrible, horrible things happening to people in them. Um, I've had a lot of like sort of LGBTQIA plus characters. I've had quite a few sex workers in my books, and it's just much more interesting, I think, because like I was saying earlier, with you want your horror to always have a bland older white man in the lead, and as the main protagonist, or do you want to broaden the net a little bit and have different people who have different backgrounds, different stories, much more interesting stories than rich white man, you know?
Totally
So
agree.
it seems like a strange argument, to be honest. I steer clear of everything. To be honest, most of the entire horror book community, because I just like to write my books and watch horror films and talk about them.
It's quite nice. It's probably easier that way.
I think so. There's so many strange little arguments break out over the smallest things, and this one doesn't sound like it's the smallest thing, but sometimes I'll just be like, "Oh, move on." Who cares?
Very outraged on the internet sometimes.
Yeah, too easy.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview with me. It's been really, really lovely to talk to you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you. It's nice to speak to a Scottish interviewer as well.
I know.
I've only ever had interviews with North Americans, which is lovely. I love you guys, you North American guys, but it's nice to get a bit of a Scottish accent as well. I can be less self-conscious about my own. Quite often I
That's
try and posh myself up a little bit, speak a little bit clearer, you know, so they can understand. It's like,
Totally agree. I feel like when I'm talking to somebody who's no Scottish, I make like a real effort to pronounce my R's and my T's. Like, because when I'm no, I'm just like.
No, it's great. Thanks for having me on. It was very enjoyable.